24.
Genesis 24:34. And before we get into that, I want to share something else with you. I think, Barbara, you had mentioned in one of the passages we read, you said that you had always heard that that reference was to Jesus. I don't remember what it was.
Pre-incarnate appearances of Christ.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I discovered something today that well, not today, this past week. I'm preaching not this coming weekend, but the following weekend at Emmanuel. And so I was doing some research on the lesson. The second lesson is from 1 Corinthians. And I had never heard this, but I got it from, remember the guy I was reading when we were doing, Paul. Ted was at a book sale somewhere, and he saw his book on 1st and 2nd Corinthians. So he got it for me. And I said, well, let me pay it for it. He says, no, it cost me 50 cents. But I was absolutely stunned because I'm reading this over I think it's the 10th chapter of 1 Corinthians. And Paul is talking about the 40 years in the desert. And he said, Paul said that they got water from the rock. Who is the water of life?
Christ.
Jesus Christ.
So he's saying that for Paul, maybe he was trying to tie that whole thing into Jesus. The manna that they got. Take only what you need. Bread of life. I mean, and I thought I had never heard that before. And I was kind of fascinated by that because that's, in church terms, what we call apologetics, which is a theology that takes things like Old Testament stories and ties them into New Testament issues. There's a whole range of apologetics that has been done. And I'd mentioned before that Paul was a great community organizer because he would get into a town and he never really jumped on people for doing something wrong. Remember we got to was it Athens, and they had the temple. And they had all these temples for gods, and they had another temple to the unnamed God. They were covering their bets just in case another god showed up. They'd say, "We didn't know how to spell your name, but we've got but right over here. We've got a temple for you." And so Paul, in his journey, when he's talking to people, I think he's trying to find ways to use apologetics, and that's apologetics doesn't mean like an apology, you've done something bad. It's that realm of explaining something that happened in the past by what we know in the present. And I was really fascinated by that. In 2 weeks, there are people going to wonder why I'm back preaching. Because there's at least an hour and a half of just good discussion over that passage.
It's going to be that long a sermon.
We're going to go into detail, and if you sign up, you'll get 2 credits of theology. But and I thought of you, Barbara, because I had said I haven't always heard all those things, but there's a reality there.
I was surprised that everybody didn't think that, because I've always been taught that,
Mm-hmm.
all those Old Testament, that it really was Christ.
Yes.
So I was surprised. So I've been thinking about how it's not that way. So I've just been thinking, but not researching. But yeah, that's funny.
But it really confirms what you've long believed.
It was Christophany was the word.
Yes.
Pre-incarnate appearance.
Are
Yes.
you referring, excuse me, are you referring to those two angels?
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
I thought one of them in the Job or the Sodom and Gomorrah instance, and the Abraham when they appeared to Abraham and Sarah.
Mhm.
Huh.
That one of them was Christ. Actually, in the Sodom and Gomorrah, I don't know if one of those was Christ, but they definitely were.
The only problem with the Sodom and Gomorrah story is we believe that Christ is forgiving.
Mhm.
And in that story, God wasn't
That's true.
as forgiving.
Mm-hmm.
But, as we read out of Genesis, and we'll get into the 40 years in the desert if we went into Exodus, but I found that just really fascinating, that so many of those references, Old Testament references, relate to what we call God, or what we refer to Jesus as the bread of life, the water of life. You give me that water, and I can give you water that you will never thirst from. And it sort of makes sense that, they're traveling across the desert and they're thirsty, so they get the water of life. So, anyway, you were more right than not.
That's what happens when you go to a Bible church.
They don't call it apologetics, they just say, this is the damn truth. So, and it's interesting because that's in Paul's letter to the Corinthians, first letter of the Corinthians. And Paul was the consummate apologist. I mean, he just really never beat up on people. Where Peter was coming in and saying, they've got to get circumcised, Paul's saying, no, there's circumcision of the heart.
Yeah.
And he won out over that. But you go into one town and they say, well, they just don't want to get circumcised. And he'd say, okay, you don't have to get circumcised, but you're going to have to give up barbecue. No ribs. And the next town says, we like those ribs, go ahead and circumcise us, because we're going to keep eating ribs. And Paul just kind of says, well, okay. He was selling, I hate to say he was selling a product, but more, he was giving the good news, and he wasn't going to let some extraneous belief keep people from receiving the good news. That was his purpose. And he was an apostle called by Christ. So, all right. Let's, Barbara, we're going to take off again, 24:34.
So he said, I am Abraham's servant. The Lord has blessed my master abundantly, and he has become wealthy. He has given him sheep and cattle, silver and gold, men servants and maidservants, and camels and donkeys. My master's wife Sarah has borne him a son in her old age, and he has given him everything he owns. And my master made me swear an oath and said, you must not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, in whose land I live. But go to my father's family and to my own clan and get a wife for my son.
Okay, let me pause you there for just a minute. What did read that again about the finding the wife?
Verse 37.
37. And my master made me swear an oath and said, you must not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, Canaanites in whose land I live.
Yeah, okay. I wasn't sure if I heard you right the first time, because he told them, don't get a Canaanite woman.
Yeah.
You've got to go find somebody from my own tribe. And again, remember, this was the problem that Lot's daughters had, trying to maintain the purity of the race. Okay.
Then I asked my master, what if the woman will not come back with me? He replied, the Lord before whom I have walked will send his angel with you and make your journey a success, so that you can get a wife for my son from my own clan and from my father's family. Then when you go to my clan, you will be released from my oath, even if they refuse to give her to you. You will be released from my oath. When I came to the spring today, I said, O Lord God of my master Abraham, if you will, please grant success to the journey on which I have come. See, I am standing before this spring. If a maiden comes out to draw water, and I say to her, please let me drink a little water from your jar, and if she says to me, drink, and I'll draw water for your camels too, let her be the one the Lord has chosen for my master's son. Before I finished praying in my heart, Rebecca came out with her jar on her shoulder. She went down to the spring and drew water, and I said to her, please give me a drink. She quickly lowered her jar from her shoulder and said, drink, and I'll water your camels too. So I drank, and she watered the camels also. I asked her, whose daughter are you? She said, the daughter of Bethuel, son of Nahor, whom Milcah bore to him. Then I put the ring on her nose and the bracelets on her arms, and I bowed down and worshipped the Lord. I praised the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had led me on the right road to get the granddaughter of my master's brother for his son. Now if you will show kindness and faithfulness to my master, tell me, and if not, tell me, so I may know which way to turn. Laban and Bethuel answered, this is from the Lord. We can say nothing to you one way or the other. Here is Rebekah. Take her and go, and let her become the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has directed. When Abraham's servant heard what they said, he bowed down to the ground before the Lord. Then the servant brought out gold and silver jewelry and articles of clothing and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave costly gifts to her brother and to her mother. Then he and the men who were with him ate and drank and spent the night there. When they got up the next morning, he said, send me on my way to my master. But her brother and her mother replied, let the girl remain with us 10 days or so, then you may go. But he said to them, do not detain me. Now that the Lord has granted success to my journey, send me on my way so I may go to my master. Then they said, let's call the girl and ask her about it. So they called Rebekah and asked her, will you go with this man? I will go, she said. So they sent their sister Rebekah on her way, along with her nurse and Abraham's servant and his man. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, our sister, may you increase to thousands upon thousands. May your offspring possess the gates of their enemies. Then Rebekah and her maids got ready and mounted their camels and went back with the man. So the servant took Rebekah and left. Now Isaac had come from Beer Lahai Roi, for he was living in the Negev. He went out to the field one evening to meditate, and as he looked up, he saw camels approaching. Rebekah also looked up and saw Isaac. She got down from her camel and asked the servant, who is that man in the field coming to meet us? He is my master, the servant answered. So she took her veil and covered herself. Then the servant told Isaac all he had done. Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebekah. So she became his wife, and he loved her, and Isaac was comforted after his mother's death.
Okay.
The rest of the story.
the rest of the story.
We stopped in the middle last week.
Yeah. I keep remembering Bob's comment about
We didn't know nose rings were biblical until
Yeah.
we read this.
Yeah. Now all these girls that are getting nose rings, they're following in Rebecca's tradition.
I know everything's supposed to have a reason for something. Why was she concerned about her brother and her mother?
Rebecca? Well, she was marrying a man that was far away,
Okay.
and he would not be there to take care of her family. But it's, this really is a lovely story.
Oh, yeah.
Of
Oh, well.
they send somebody off to find Isaac a wife, and they meet this young woman who's
And they called Jared.
Hmm?
And they called Jared.
yeah. Good.
Did you get that?
I love it that she said exactly what he asked God to have be said.
Yes.
That's so, exciting.
Yeah. They talk about a match made in heaven. This is as close as you come. And but you notice Rebecca, when she leaves, it says Rebecca and her young maids mounted the camels and followed the man. She wasn't living hand to mouth. I mean, her family had some money, and then when they hooked her up, when they agreed, says then he brought out gifts of silver and gold and clothing, and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave expensive gifts to her brother and mother. He and his men had supper and spent the night. So, the family knew that she wasn't marrying into a
Poor family.
poor family, that this is someone who is a person of means. And, they should know that when Isaac sent his servant off to find a wife.
It wasn't Isaac that sent him, it was Abraham.
Well, Abraham. But he shows up with
Yeah.
the servant, and he has servants, and they have camels, and they took a lot of this, stuff. And as we read this, I reflect back on Ishmael. Remember, Ishmael was the first child of Abraham, and his mother married him off she went to Egypt and found him a wife, and he ran the caravan between Egypt and wherever. So, when we're reading this, these people are out, they're riding on camels. Donkeys don't come into this until later. They're on camels. So if they're on camels, I'm kind of thinking they're in the desert. I mean, you don't
They're
have,
nomads.
yeah. I mean, you don't have camels if you're living in a subdivision or, in a city. So, all of this, all this kind of meshes together. If we look at the broad brush story, you can see that maybe there's a connection here between Abraham and his half-brother. So let's...
Pony Express took messages from one group to the other.
Oh,
I'm being silly. The Pony Express took messages from one
oh,
group to the other.
Yeah.
Pony Express on camels.
I like that.
Okay, let's get into 25 because this is an interesting story.
Abraham took another wife, whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Jokshan was the father of Sheba and Dedan. The descendants of Dedan were the Asherites, the Letushites, and the Lumites. The sons of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Hanok, Abida, and Eldah. All these were descendants of Keturah. Abraham left everything he owned to Isaac, but while he was still living, he gave gifts to the sons of his concubines and sent them away from his son Isaac to the land of the east. Altogether, Abraham lived 175 years. Then Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age, an old man and full of years, and he was gathered to his people. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah near Mamre, in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar the Hittite, the field Abraham had bought from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried with his wife Sarah. After Abraham's death, God blessed his son Isaac, who then lived near Beer Lahai Roi. This is the account of Abraham's son Ishmael, whom Sarah's maidservant Hagar the Egyptian bore to Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, listed in the order of their birth. Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Masa, Hadad, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. These were the sons of Ishmael, and these are the names of the 12 tribal rulers according to their settlements and camps. Altogether, Ishmael lived 137 years. He breathed his last and died, and he was gathered to his people. His descendants settled in the area from Havilah to Shur, near the border of Egypt, as you go toward Ashur. They lived in hostility toward all their brothers.
Okay. I like the message is a little more clear.
Uh-huh.
It says the Ishmaelites didn't get along with any of their kin. Now, there is the Old Testament professor in seminary. One of the quizzes or tests that he had asked us to name the 6 sons of Keturah.
He was just cruel.
Oh,
Yeah. And
Of course, you aced that one, right?
yeah, I wasn't sure who Keturah was.
there.
Because the Episcopal Church at that time didn't believe in divorce and remarriage.
There.
So, although he wasn't divorced, Rebecca
No,
or
because Rebecca died.
Sarah died.
Yeah, Sarah died.
But one of the key and the reason for putting this together is when Moses leaves Egypt, where does he go? Well, in chapter 2 of Exodus, it says Moses flees to Midian. Now, this is where the problem came in. All of the characters so far were worshiping Yahweh, their God. But when Moses went to Midian, he took care of his father-in-law's flock. And he went up on that mountain, and there was a burning bush. Well, there was a question. Was that the God Yahweh? And the way they make the connection to the God Yahweh is Keturah had 6 sons, and one of them's name was Midian. So they draw the line, the lineage, because these 6 sons of Keturah were sons of Abraham. So they would take with them the God of Abraham. And so the Midianites were worshiping the God Yahweh, not even close to the Holy Land. They're down closer to Egypt. So that's how that connection is made. Because you could ask yourself, well, if Moses is down on this mountain tending his father-in-law's flock, and he sees a burning bush, how do we know that's not Baal or some other god? Well, because they were worshiping the God Yahweh. And so that's why he emphasized that we know the 6 sons of Keturah. And I know that one of them is Midian. And after that connection there, Midian started a shrine in Wichita.
The Shriners.
Yeah, the Midian shrine down there. And he wore one of those little hats. And he had one of those little cars
Yeah.
that he would drive around.
Were they the forerunners of the Templars?
Yeah. He would drive that little car around with that fez on his head. And, anytime there was a parade, they would contact Midian and say, get your boys and come on down to the parade. So they were kept relatively busy with that job. But
Is that where that name came from?
Midian shrine,
Is there?
Yeah.
Okay, wow.
these things, they're connections we don't even know about that are made.
Like with Shriners?
Yeah. And see, the Shriners it's a secret organization. Yeah.
Secret.
Yeah. That not everybody keeps a secret.
Right.
But, that's where the term for the Midian comes from.
Are the Shriners the ones, if you join it, you have to ride a donkey backwards?
I don't know.
I've always heard.
That may be so.
My mom's family were kind of into the shrine, and I was never. I was invited to join DeMolay, but I have a couple cousins who were in Job's Daughters.
Oh, I was in Job's Daughters.
Were you?
You guys in
Oh, yeah. Well, I wasn't in it, but I do.
Job's Daughters? Back in the day?
Isn't the Masonic Lodge?
That's part of the Masonic.
Pardon?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
That's part of Masonry, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's
Its forefathers were the Templars.
there are different routes that you can go, and it used to be a very popular thing,
Yeah.
Back when
but now it's
membership
kind of
organizations was.
it's sort of gone the way of the church.
Yeah.
People don't.
And any kind of civic clubs, I mean, they're
Yeah.
well
Yeah,
known. They still exist.
the Optimist Club and
Rotary.
Rotary, Kiwanis. Rotary,
Lions, they've all gone.
the Lions, I think, have a few people who are still relatively active, but it's not the same as it used to be, which is good.
Like everything, they can't get young people.
Yeah, and
Kind of like Grace Church.
yeah. So, but anyway, that's the importance of Keturah and the 6 sons, that it ties them to the God Yahweh. So when Moses sees that burning bush, it means that's Yahweh in that bush. Now, in what we've read here in 25, the first 6 verses are Elohis, or Yahweh. And then from the 7th verse down to verse 20, that appears to be priestly. And we know that it's different from the rest because you're getting this family tree, the lineage, who was related to who, but when it gets down in that, when Abraham dies, his sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him. So, you know, that somehow there was some kind of family connection. And you know, unlike a lot of families, death helps drive a bigger wedge. But apparently they came together. And maybe when they found out that Abraham blessed Isaac and gave him everything, Ishmael was not happy. And at that point, he didn't get along with their kin. So that tie to Egypt was more than the family could handle. So, okay.
Oh, I have a question.
Mhm.
Should I be understanding some connection between Ishmael's sons being 12 and 12 princes with their 12 tribes?
Yes,
I mean, that's a number we hear.
that's right. And I'm glad you picked up on that because I was going to mention that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
Got ahead.
I'd forgotten it. I was just going to move on to the rest of the scripture. Here we have those 12 tribes.
Yeah.
My book Bible says this information confirms that God's promise in chapter 17, verse 20 was fulfilled. Because he told Hagar that Ishmael would father 12 children.
Oh,
If you go back and look.
okay.
But-
I believe it.
But they were tied together with the 12 princes and their 12 tribes.
Mm-hmm.
Who else had 12 tribes?
Jacob.
The Israelites.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like saying, you know, Ishmael had some kind of connection to God Yahweh,
Yeah.
because Yahweh set up the tribes. And so it's saying, you know, Ishmael still kind of was a Yahwist, but he was more like a Christmas and Easter Yahwist. So he had 12 tribes, but you know they didn't get along with the other 12 tribes.
He's like a black sheep.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in some ways, I feel sorry for him. I mean, he got sent away,
Yeah, it was.
and because Sarah was envious, and I think she didn't want Abraham's
Right.
will to have to be split between.
Isaac and Ishmael.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you got a guy. He's
Well, the way things worked back then,
firstborn, got everything.
firstborn got it.
Yeah. And who was the firstborn?
Ishmael.
And so to get rid of Ishmael meant that Isaac was going to get it.
But does that mean from a concubine? It wasn't the wife, the firstborn.
No.
The firstborn of the wife, not the concubine, isn't it?
Well, usually it's
If the wife has one.
firstborn male.
Okay.
It would be, you know, it's
Ishmael.
always the firstborn male. And you know, this is the same thing that happened in English history. The king always had a couple of girlfriends, but if they had a child, they were never part of the royal lineage.
Oh.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
they were.
Just like Camilla's not part of the, you know,
Yeah.
Charles's. Her kids are out plowing the field.
Yeah.
She wants them to have hoods on and stuff, but they're not gonna do it.
Thank
So-
goodness.
Tell us how you feel, Sheriff.
This is what makes Bible study so much fun.
That's funny.
Well, let's continue with Jacob and Esau.
Where are we?
Esau. I use the southern pronunciation.
Where are we, Father?
We're at verse 19.
In 25?
Yes.
Okay.
This is the account of Abraham's son Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel the Aramean from Paddan Aram, and sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment, so they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them.
Now, let me just pause there. In the Message translation, that Esau means hairy, and Jacob means heel, because he was grabbing onto the heel. So that hairy that's not like the king's son Harry. It's meant.
I'm sure nobody said, "Oh, what a cute baby," when they saw Esau.
No, really.
I mean, seriously.
Which one of you was born first?
I was.
Did you come out holding under her heel? That'd be biblical.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. I think you're 27.
Okay. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was a quiet man staying among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." That is why he was also called Edom. Jacob replied, "First, sell me your birthright." "Look, I'm about to die," Esau said. "What good is the birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob.
Excuse me.
Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank, and then he got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright.
Okay.
Just sell your birthright for a little grocery, son.
Yeah. Yeah.
Feed them and they will countenance.
My Bible has a footnote about Edom that says, Edom sounds like the Hebrew word for red.
Yes.
That wasn't why they called it red stew. Can we associate that with something we eat today? Red stew or?
Well, would the lentils be red?
They can be.
Yeah, it could be.
So,
There's a variety of colors.
Probably depended on the spices.
Yeah, oh, okay.
That makes me laugh because I have little grandchildren, and that sounds just like them. Just fighting with each other and bargaining. manipulating,
Promise.
Boy, that's strange that they
power
do that.
struggles.
Nobody has that experience with their kids or
No.
grandkids.
Oh, no.
So that made me laugh.
I guess I try to tie too much. The red makes me think the blood of Christ, red, you know, there's so many things that are red that really are important, but I
Mhm.
don't think this has anything to do with that. That it's just happens to be like, I want my steak well done, you know,
Yeah.
versus rare.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah.
That, and you know, I wish Paul were here because he could explain it. But you know that it's interesting. I mean, I can't believe selling your birthright over some,
But
Stew.
that made the prophecy true, the older will serve the younger.
you know,
Well, maybe he thought nobody would hold him to it since he was the older one.
Yeah.
you know. The looking back at the beginning of 26, they were talking about the family tree of Jacob's son Abraham, the family tree of Isaac, the son of Abraham. Abraham had Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, the Aramean from Padam Aram, and sister of Laban, the Aramean. And I'm trying to think, isn't it earlier in Genesis that a wandering Aramean?
Well, that was Abraham, wasn't
It was
it?
Abraham, was a wandering Aramean.
That is a in Jewish faith. That's part of their creed, you know, you might say. A wandering Aramean was my father.
Yeah, that's in
And-
Leviticus in the law. I
Yeah,
think it's Leviticus in the laws where it says you're supposed to say that when you take a certain
yes,
sacrifice to the
yes.
priest.
And so I just wanted to point that out because they're making such a big deal out of this Bethuel, the Aramean from Pada Aram, and the sister of Laban, the Aramean.
Well,
So-
that would make Abraham an Aramean too,
Yes.
because he
He was
was
A wandering
related.
Aramean was our father. And so, you know, this stuff all ties together. I mean, it really is fun.
Yeah, it is.
I don't know if we want to get into chapter 26 or not, but the let's next week we'll cover chapter 26.